Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the portion of trial where closing arguments will be given. Since the state has the burden of proof, the state will get to begin and close the closing argument. State, are you prepared to give your closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, whenever you're ready.
The truth is the truth. It shouldn't change. And the truth is, the walls were closing in on Devyn Michaels and the fantasy that she had put together. And what was her response when her children were taken away? Jonathan had custody, and this was in danger. She did the unfathomable. She murdered Jonathan Willette. The crime charged in this case is murder with use of a deadly weapon. You heard from the judge. She did read that to you folks prior to our break. So what it is willful, unlawful, felonious, and with malice aforethought, the defendant killed Jonathan Willette, a human being, with use of a deadly weapon, be it a wooden stick and or an unknown object, by striking the said Jonathan Willette with the said wooden stick and or other unknown object, and or through other unknown means. The said killing having been 1, willful, deliberate, and premeditated, and or 2nd, committed during the perpetration or attempted perpetration of a robbery. Let's start with the easy one, the deadly weapon. You heard from the defendant that she hit Jonathan Willette with a stick, and he died. So this is clearly showing that that stick that she described to you is a deadly weapon because it resulted in the death of Jonathan Willette. Now I want to point out something very important that's in your instructions, and it's not something to gloss over. The state is not required to have recovered the deadly weapon used in the crime in this case. So keep that in the back of your mind that we are not required to do that. However, we have the confession from the defendant that that is what she used. So that being said, you'll have your verdict form when you go back to deliberate. So I think it's helpful to sort of walk through that. So based on knowing that there was a deadly weapon used beyond a reasonable doubt, we're able then to eliminate guilty of first degree without the use of a deadly weapon, and also guilty of second-degree murder, and guilty of voluntary manslaughter. So all that we are left are those charges with use of a deadly weapon. Let's talk about murder. Your instructions tell you that murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. Whether express or implied, the unlawful killing may be effected by any of the various means by which death may be occasioned. So let's talk about malice aforethought. What does that mean? That is the intentional doing of a wrongful act. So I don't think anyone is going to get up here and say that this was not a brutal first-degree murder. Knowing that, defendant's actions were not voluntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice aforethought, without deliberation or premeditation. It is a killing upon a sudden quarrel or heat of passion caused by a provocation sufficient to make the passion irresistible. That is not what we have in this case. The defendant said in her statement to the police, told the police, that she was giving Jonathan a back massage while he was laying face down on his bed. She was next to him. She got up off the bed, made the conscious decision to then walk over to that fireplace that we all saw, grab what she described as a candlestick, an object, right? Walks over, makes the conscious decision to then walk over, goes to the bed, and while Jonathan is still face down, with his head facing away from her, as she told us, she took that stick and bashed the victim in the head. He had no clue that this was coming. Conscious decisions every step of the way. His body goes limp. This is not voluntary manslaughter. The instruction also tells you if there should appear to have been sufficient time for a cool head to prevail, and the voice of reason to be heard, the killing shall be attributed to deliberate revenge and determined by you to be murder. The defendant did mention that the victim, Jonathan Willette, had rubbed on her leg. And then she kind of just shooed it off. It was like, okay. And then, after that, he seemed happy, right? His face was turned away. He thought he was getting more of a massage. But instead, the defendant made those conscious decisions that I just went over and bashed him in the head. This is not voluntary manslaughter. So that being said, when you go back to deliberate, you'll have this form again. We've already crossed off the ones that don't apply, so let's cross off the other one. Voluntary manslaughter with use of deadly weapon. Because no one's going to get up here with reasonableness and say that this was voluntary manslaughter. So then what are we left with? First degree murder. You were instructed that murder of the first degree is murder which is perpetrated by means of any kind of willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing. What are those three elements? Willfulness, deliberation, and premeditation. And I do have a graphic photo here, so I just want to warn everyone, including in the gallery, that there will be a graphic photo. This is first degree murder. What is willfulness? Willfulness is the intent to kill. There need be no appreciable space of time between formation of the intent to kill and the act of killing. What is deliberation? Deliberation is the process of determining upon a course of action to kill as a result of thought, including weighing the reasons for and against the action and considering the consequences of those actions. This is very important, and I am going to spend some time on this. A deliberate determination may be arrived at in a short period of time. The best way to illustrate this is the stoplight example. So all of us drive to work, we're on our way to work, and there's a stoplight. Sometimes that stoplight turns yellow. And when it's yellow, you're making some conscious decisions at that point, right? Either you're taking the decision to press on the brakes, but during that you're deciding, well, is someone going to rear end me, right? If I just stop on my brakes, right? Is my coffee that I just bought from Starbucks going to fly all over the car, then I'm not going to have coffee at work if I slam on my brakes? Is my purse going to fly off the seat, and I'm already running late for work, so how am I going to have time to put all the items back in my purse so I can walk into work? If I press on the brakes, I'm going to then potentially be late for work. And I've already been written up a couple of times, so this may be the time I'm fired. All of this is going on in your head when you're faced with that yellow light. You're also thinking, well, I obviously can't press on my brakes, right? So I'm going to have to blow through this light. But what are you thinking about when you're going, making the decision to run that yellow light that's about to turn red? You're hoping there's no cop, right? You're hoping that a motorcycle doesn't come out from nowhere and you hurt someone. There's no bicyclist that's just somehow hoping that you're going to stop at the red light because they see that it's yellow. All of these are conscious decisions that you're weighing, and that is all deliberation in a short period of time. We do it every day. Again, it need not be for a day, an hour, or even a minute, this premeditation, this decision making. It may be as instantaneous as successive thoughts of the mind. The stoplight example. No matter how rapidly the act follows the premeditation, it is premeditated. That is what happened in this case, when the defendant made each conscious decision ending Jonathan Willette's life. We also have another theory of first-degree murder. That's called felony murder. There are certain kinds of murder which carry with them conclusive evidence of malice aforethought. Therefore, a killing which is committed in the perpetration or attempted perpetration of a robbery is deemed to be murder of the first degree. So what is a robbery? You are instructed that robbery is the unlawful taking of personal property from the person of another, or in his presence against his will, by means of force or violence or fear of injury, immediate or future, to his person or property, or the person or person or property of a member of his family. Such force or fear must be used to 1. Obtain or retain possession of the property, 2. To prevent or overcome resistance to the taking of the property, or 3. To facilitate escape with the property. We heard a lot of evidence over the past 2 weeks, which is why I'm slowly going through this today. We have evidence that the defendant took multiple items of Jonathan's belongings. Social security card, a wallet, his only set of car keys. Why did she want those things? How was she going to enroll the girls at school without having Jonathan's documentation? This all goes into her motive. The defendant obtained Jonathan's property by means of force or violence, i.e., she killed him, and took his wallet, his only set of keys, and his social security card. This is another easy one. That being said, you'll have your verdict form. And between both theories of murder, we are confident that you'll be able to check that first box and at this point eliminate the second-degree murder. But that being said, any way you look at this case, this is first-degree murder. And this is important to note, because when you go back there, you're doing an important thing. But what is also important is that while a guilty verdict must be unanimous, you need not be unanimous on the means or the theory of first-degree murder in arriving at your verdict. What do all those words mean? That means when you go back there and you're carefully weighing the evidence in this case, if 6 of you decide that the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt the felony murder theory, and 6 of you decide that it's the premeditated deliberate, that doesn't matter. The verdict would be guilty of first-degree murder. You need not be unanimous on the theory of first-degree murder. So there's been a lot of talk over the past 2 weeks about Deviere, and we're not shying away from this. You saw him testify on the witness stand. There is overwhelming evidence beyond what he told you that Deviere did not murder his father. Let's go through that. We'll start with Deviere's testimony under oath. He tells you that he saw his father, Jonathan Willette, at that Porcupine Rim address, the house that he and Devyn shared, briefly on August 6th. You'll recall that he saw his dad in the garage and just went right back inside. They never had a discussion. And he was home at the Porcupine Rim address on August 6th. He told you that he was helping the girls, his sisters, Devyn's daughters, with homework. The defendant, Devyn, tells him that she's going to help John move some things. He goes on about his night. He stays at the house, he watches a movie with the girls, he puts them to sleep. This is what he's telling us. He goes to sleep around 10 p.m. He woke up, he recalls, around 2 a.m. to see Devyn getting in bed, which they shared at that time, and he just went back to sleep. He woke up at 6 a.m. the next morning on August 7th. He gets dressed, he goes to work. Even if you don't want to take his word for it, which we believe you should, we also have other evidence to corroborate what Deviere told you. This is a text message that Deviere sent to the defendant, Devyn Michaels, where he texted her, "See you when you get back. I'm going to sleep. Girls are in the living room," corroborating that he put the girls to sleep and he was going to sleep as well. This was on August 6th, 2023 at 10:36 p.m. We also have video surveillance to corroborate this. No video surveillance shows Deviere's vehicles in Paladura's neighborhood. Paladura being the murder house neighborhood. No vehicles belonging to Deviere are seen. And we spent a lot of time going through that video surveillance on that lengthier day of trial, showing you that there is no indication that Deviere's vehicles are in that neighborhood on the night of the murder. There's no video surveillance showing Deviere's vehicles entering or exiting Porcupine Rim neighborhood, the neighborhood he lives in with Devyn. Remember that fixed camera? There was no indication that his vehicles left that evening, or entered, for that matter. Deviere's vehicle was in the same position overnight. You recall there was sort of that catty corner home that had that footage showing the daytime and the nighttime, and the van, Deviere's van, remaining in the same position, to a T. There's also no video surveillance showing Deviere jumping a back wall to get in another vehicle. There is no evidence of that. What we do have is Deviere leaving in his work van at 7:31 a.m. on August 7th, because that's what happened. We also have the CDR mapping, which also rules Deviere out, beyond his word. If you recall, there was that Detective Good testified pretty in depth. He had color-coded the different phones so that you could see with ease which phones were popping up at which times. You recall Deviere's was green. We see green popping up at that Porcupine Rim Street, which is his home, throughout the night, and more importantly, during the time period of the murder, which we'll talk about later, because we are able to narrow that down. At no point do we see Deviere at the murder house the night of the murder, and even more importantly, during the murder. Again, I explained this, I just want to show it. This is that footage of the nighttime. We see, if you recall, up in that top right-hand corner, we see the victim's truck, Jonathan Willette's truck. We also see right next to it, Deviere's work van. This is the night of August 6th. This is the next morning of August 7th. There's that same work van, Deviere's work van, in the same position. Nighttime, daytime, nighttime, daytime. Never changing. Physics also ruled Deviere out. A lot of discussion about how he jumped a back wall, he took the road that's one house over, that, not the road, but the little dirt path, right, to get all the way across town. 7.5 hours? No. That's not common sense. I also think it's important to highlight Deviere and the defendant's relationship, Devyn's relationship. Devyn is a master manipulator, and that is shown through the evidence. This is a woman in her late 30s that decided to begin a sexual relationship with her 19-year-old stepson, who had just lost his virginity. I'm not going to get up here and say that the 19-year-old teenage boy, this wasn't his dream to be with Devyn Michaels, who was an older, more sexually experienced woman. But what I am going to say is that the defendant is the one running the show here. This was her fantasy, and he went along with it. For a while, though. Because remember, he tried to move away to California on multiple occasions, and somehow she was able to spin her web and bring him back. The most glaring portion being when she uses a supposed pregnancy against Deviere to bring him back to Las Vegas. When she threatened him, I will have this baby and tell everyone whose baby it is if you don't move back to Las Vegas. So what does young Deviere do? He moves back to Las Vegas. He doesn't want a kid at his young age, and even complicate his relationship with his family that doesn't know about their relationship or their sexual engagements. There's also messages that show that Devyn was in charge of this relationship. He tried to get out multiple times. So now that we've talked about this could not be Deviere, let's talk about who's on trial today. Devyn Michaels, the defendant, and how there is overwhelming evidence that she committed first-degree murder. I'm going to go over a roadmap of all the different evidence that you heard in the past 2 weeks and sum it up as much as I can. We'll start with Yoko and Yoshida's testimony, Devyn's inconsistent statements, so her own words, the scene, the DNA, the burlap, which we heard about today again, CDR mapping, video surveillance, the phone contents, and we'll also talk about the custody case and those witnesses we heard yesterday. I think it's very important to start with the timeline because, as Mr. Giordani said, this one's a wild ride and we have to buckle up. So let me start with the timeline here. The timeline starts August 6th of 2023. Devyn, John, the girls, they're all shopping for the girls' first day of school. At 8 p.m., Devyn arrives at the murder house in her vehicle, and Yoko confirms this. At 8:42 p.m., Devyn, the defendant, and John drive to Devyn's home. At 9:40 p.m., Devyn and John drive back toward the murder home. 10:04 p.m., Devyn and John they get to Chevron. They're there for a few minutes, as we saw, and then return back to the Paladura neighborhood at 10:12 p.m. And that's even confirmed by Yoko saying that she saw Devyn and John, and that's when John began to prepare a meal for himself. At 11 p.m., a person places something in the Nissan Armada, Devyn's Nissan Armada, moves the Armada in front of the murder house. And what's notable about that, and I think it's important to highlight, is it went from being in front of the camera to being out of the camera, but more importantly, closer to the house, right in front of the driveway, and nose to nose with Jonathan's truck, which we see was in the same position the next day based on the surveillance, as well as the testimony from the officers in this case. We then turn to August 7th, 2023. At 1 a.m., Yoko runs into Devyn for about 15 minutes or so. At 2:04 a.m., Devyn leaves the murder home in her Nissan Armada. At 2:39, she's at that CVS drive-thru that we saw the surveillance video for. And then at 8:40 a.m., there is that 911 call from Jonathan's mother when she discovers her son dead. We can then safely say on this timeline that the murder that Devyn committed occurred between 10:12 p.m. and 2:04 a.m. So knowing this time frame, we're able to look at the corroborating evidence. Let's start with Yoshida's testimony. The day before the murder on August 6th, he sees Devyn at the murder house. And more importantly, he also saw her vehicle at Paladura. We heard from Yoko. Again, around 8 p.m., Devyn arrives at Paladura in her Nissan Armada. Devyn and John then leave in John's truck. Around 10 p.m., Devyn and John return to Paladura. Yoko sees them. After seeing them, she goes upstairs. At 1 a.m., she goes back downstairs. She runs into Devyn, and what did she describe to you? Devyn looks surprised. Why? Importantly, Yoko also says that the light was on in John's room. Of course, you also heard that the way the bed was situated, you would have to walk into the room, down, and go around to actually see the bed. But regardless, she sees that the light is on in the room. Devyn tells her that John started drinking and went to bed. Yoko told you that she didn't hear anything from John's room. The light was on. Didn't really think anything of it. And that she and Devyn talked and washed dishes for about 15 minutes. Because that's when Devyn told her that Jonathan, the next morning, was going to meet her with the girls, and they were going to go ahead and go enroll the girls at school and take them to school. She confirmed to you that there were only 4 people at the home. Yoko, Yoshida, Devyn, and the victim, Jonathan. At 1:15, she goes upstairs. She goes to sleep after having that conversation with Devyn. Around 2 a.m., she wakes to the dogs barking in the backyard. And if you'll remember, that was abnormal. The dogs, when John was asleep or at night in general, were not in the backyard. So why were they in the backyard barking? She also heard a thud. She then goes back to sleep. At 8 a.m., she goes downstairs, sees John's truck is outside, which is a little weird because Devyn had told her that the plan was for him to already be gone by that time in the morning to go enroll the girls. So her antennas were up a little bit. She calls him, calls John, he doesn't pick up, prepares her coffee, goes back upstairs. She called him again, no answer. So now her senses are heightened even more. So she goes back downstairs. She looks around John's room, couldn't see him, because again, the bed is sort of around that corner, as you saw in the photos. She then goes upstairs again. After going upstairs, again, feeling even more heightened concern, she goes back downstairs. And it's at this point she goes deeper into John's lower room, a makeshift bedroom. She sees that the doggy door is down, and the dogs are still outside, abnormal. She saw inside the garage door, inside garage door was half open, the one leading into the garage, abnormal. The big garage door was open as well, as you all saw in the photos. It had an opening there, abnormal. So then she investigates more. She goes to his bed, and she sees John wrapped in a blanket. She opens the blanket, and she saw feet. She then goes around to the other side of the bed and sees the amount of blood that's on the other side. Goes upstairs, tells Yoshida, they call 911. Devyn also made several inconsistent statements. The truth is the truth, it shouldn't change. What were those inconsistent statements? The first one, Jonathan's engagement ring. If you recall in interview 1, Devyn tells the officers, we threw his engagement ring in the trash last night. Okay. Interview 2, threw away John's engagement ring. We kind of made a joke of it, 2 points, threw it in the trash type thing. So it should be in the trash, right? We saw pictures of the trash, of multiple trashes in the Paladura address. Not just one, but multiple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. None of them containing a ring that were searched by officers. Ladies and gentlemen, there was no ring that was thrown in the trash. Inconsistency 2. Her marriage to Deviere. We learned from interview number 2 that this was a marriage of convenience, not intimacy, which we know is not true based on other evidence in the case. Interview number 3, Her marriage to Deviere is just on paper. Rings aren't significant. Me and Dev haven't been intimate in years. That's not true. Inconsistency 3, the gun safe. In interview number 1, Devyn tells officers, "We took the guns last night, but we didn't bring ammunition because there's no safe at my home for them." Ladies and gentlemen, we saw pictures of a safe. There was a gun safe in the home. There's a close-up of it there. And there's guns and ammunition. Gun safe in the home. No safe. Inconsistency 4, Jonathan's wallet. In interview number 2, she tells officers, "John lost his wallet yesterday. He leaves stuff around a lot," minimizing. Then we have interview number 3, which is after the search warrant of Porcupine Rim, where they start to confront her with the fact that there's Jonathan's items in there, more specifically his wallet. She tells them, at first, "Nothing of John's is in my house." John's wallet wasn't at his house, so do you know where it is? "No, sir." "I have all of his old driver's licenses. The license you found is an old one." We know that's not true. "I tucked the wallet away in bags. I knew, but how would she know that the wallet was wrapped in bags in her underwear drawer? She wasn't confronted with that. "Nothing of John's in my house." But there was. His only set of car keys, his current driver's license, his wallet. And what was found inside her purse? Jonathan Willette's Social Security card. Why would she have those things? But nothing of John's at her house. Again, the license you found is an old one. And if we look here close up, it expired November 7th of 2025. The murder happened August 7th of 2023. This was his active driver's license. His old one? "I tucked his wallet away in bags." Remember, ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't one bag. This was 8 bags, and you heard in the interview with Detective Weinoff, that were tied over and over and over and over again. Not just one bag. What was she trying to hide? Also, how would she know? Inconsistency 5. Where was John? In interview 1, she tells officers that John was in the garage, awake, smoking when she left. He was smoking when Yoko came down. But remember, Yoko said Devyn told her John was sleeping off his alcohol. So which one is true? She says she said goodbye to him, pushed out a box under the garage, went out the front door. Then the next interview, last thing she did with John was pop his back. He went to smoke. She talked to Yoko. She finished loading. He told her what to take, and that was it. All inconsistent. And not the same story. Inconsistency 6. John's bloody phone found at Devyn's home. There's a lot of discussion about this during the trial because it's important. And it shows that Devyn committed the murder. And why? First of all, she told us in interview number 3 He told me he cut his hand. Okay? He said he was moving a table and one of the parts fell and took a chunk of his hand. She offers this to police. I didn't see it, but I do know he mentioned bleeding on his hand. Very descriptive. Then interview number 3. He must have been smoking and set his phone down. Again, no notifications are found on John's phone, as if someone manipulated it. Because as we know, John was called and texted multiple times, especially when people were trying to find him. Why would he have no notifications on his home screen? That's because the phone wasn't left by John. You know that his blood was on the phone. And we know that it arrived after the murder based on those CVRs. Based on that raw data, we know when John's phone made it to Devyn's residence. And that's when she took it there because, as you know, it traveled with her after she committed the murder back to her home. This is also an important one. She tells detectives that it was dark in the room and she couldn't see when she committed the murder. In interview 4, we finally get her confession. She hit him. And that's when we get the details. But she tells us that she couldn't really see what she grabbed off the fireplace because it was dark, but she could see him breathing. She tells the detectives, because they're a little confused by that statement, because she can't describe the object in her very hand, but she's able to see Jonathan breathing. She tells him, well, if your eyes can adjust. And remember, Yoko said the light was on in John's room when she came downstairs. It wasn't off. It's also important to note that he was wearing boxers. He had his boxer briefs on, she tells the police. And we know that's not true. The boxers were found at the foot, next to the side of the bed, as shown right here. She also can't really account for the time after seeing Yoko at 1 a.m. And this one's really important. In interview number 4, she initially tells detectives, well, I wasn't there for an hour after Yoko came down. That's not true. But then she's confronted that, no, there is evidence that you were, in fact, there until 2:04 in the morning. So detectives trying to solve this case for the family, is asking, what were you doing? What were you doing in that time frame? She remembers every detail before. She remembers every detail after. You heard the interview. But she doesn't remember this time. Why? Because she did it. She was decapitating Jonathan. I can't remember. I remember talking to Yoko, getting my stuff, leaving, going to the pharmacy, and going home. But she doesn't remember the time frame that she was decapitating Jonathan. Why? She's told, this has got to be eating you up. And this is why videos are so important. This is her response.
This has got to be eating you up. This has got to be eating you up.
She's nodding.
This has got to be eating you up.
This is eating her up.
This has got to be eating you up.
Ladies and gentlemen, she admitted to the murder. She said in her interview, when she confessed, that she took that object, the stick, the wooden stick, and bashed Jonathan in the head. That is the murder. But there was a head missing, and that was important to the detectives to give closure to the family. So what about the decapitation?
Well, it's, you have to have something for the outer report minutes for it to be murdered, that you were in the house. That's it. That's the only time that you don't remember.
I didn't know I was there that long.
It doesn't matter if you know.
Because that's what I'm saying, I don't remember being there that long, I didn't know I left.
Okay, so is it possible you did it, you don't remember?
Yes, sir, it is very possible.
Okay.
Yes, sir. It's very possible. The scene does not lie. Defendant can lie, but the scene can't. So what's the hard evidence as well, in addition to her statements that are inconsistent, other than the confession? As we know, John was found on this bed, and there was blanketing. And we also noticed that there were two blood spots specifically on that sheet that he was wrapped in. One on one side and one on the other, as you can see in that right-hand photo. She rolled him to the edge of the bed to complete the decapitation after she had realized she murdered him by hitting him, as evidenced by the two blood spots that we see there. In that last interview as well, there was a drawing, there was a diagram, there was a sort of a back and forth a little bit with the defense talking about that the detective was the one drawing, but I will leave it up to you to sort of see how that was going down. Devyn drew that line there, and the detective told her multiple times, correct me if I'm wrong, is this where you were, where the X is? Yes, that's where I was. She drew him in the exact position she left him in. There's some truth. The DNA can't lie. We heard that Jonathan's cell phone was found at Devyn's house during that search warrant of the Porcupine Run residence. And we heard from CSA Nicole Merriam, who testified twice, that she swabbed that blood spot right there on the phone, and the testing revealed presumptive positive for blood. It also revealed Jonathan's blood. It's also important to note that Jonathan's blood was found in the driveway of the residence. We have that marker A, which you can see there, the blood spots with the cone. And we also have marker B, which was that Jonathan's bed frame, where they saw those droplets of blood. All Jonathan's blood. It also is interesting where these blood spots are, because they're in the driveway in the same exact place Devyn would have walked to go back to her vehicle to drive home, as we know occurred at 2:04 in the morning. Devyn's DNA is on that knot of the plastic bag containing the wallet and John's only car keys. They also tested inside and outside of the wallet, including all the pocket openings. So the inside of the wallet also contained Devyn's DNA. This wasn't Jonathan dropping it in a bag. Why would Devyn's DNA be inside the wallet? Devyn and John's DNA are on his Social Security card swab. Not shocking that Jonathan's DNA is on his Social Security swab, or Social Security card, I should say. But remember, this is Devyn's bag. You see her wearing it in the surveillance video with the chevron. She also described it to police during one of her interviews. And what's found inside is that Social Security card belonging to Jonathan Willette. And not only is it found, but it's found with the defendant's DNA on it. She handled it. She wanted to enroll the girls at school and knew that she needed documentation because the father of the children was dead. We also heard from the coroner, Dr. Doggy. The cause of death, homicidal violence. The manner of death, homicide. The internal exam, and this is important, decapitation occurred post-mortem. Jonathan was decapitated by the defendant after she bashed him with the stick and killed him. Based on the science. No one's disputing that. Not even Dr. Sims today. This is also important. No bleeding injuries on John's hands were found. None. She did discuss slippage, which she explained what that was, where, after death, the skin tends to shed a bit in different areas. But again, no bleeding injuries on John's hands. Then we had testimony from Dr. Burns, who passed around those cool exhibits. Cass, I should say. And she explained that there were 2 implements used to decapitate the victim. As you can see in the picture there, this is her annotated version showing that there were 2 implements that were in fact used. A hand-powered serrated or non-serrated knife was the first. Then a mechanically powered saw, because it's very difficult to cut through human bone. Not only did Dr. Yagi and Dr. Sims agree today, but also Dr. Burns told you that the impacts that she saw on the neck were consistent with post-mortem dismemberment. Jonathan's head was decapitated after he was murdered. There's a lot of discussion during trial about whether it's possible for a woman to do this. I think it's important to note, as Dr. Burns highlighted, a mechanical saw is made for anyone. Women can do anything, especially ones that have a clear motive. Moving on to the burla. Where was Devyn's vehicle during all of this? Her Nissan Armada shows she's at Paladura during the time of the murder. We have at 11:05 p.m., there's that short activation that we saw on the burla, which I'll go ahead and play for you. And it is not very long. It's at 11:05 p.m. on that August 6th, 2023. Which is corroborated by the video surveillance where we see her vehicle moving up right in front of the driveway of Paladura, nose to nose with Jonathan. Then we have 2:04 a.m. This is when Devyn's Nissan Armada leaves. And we saw that in the burla. She goes from the Paladura address, she goes to CVS, then she returns home to the Porcupine Rim address. I won't play this all for you, you'll have this back at evidence. You've seen it during the trial. We also have that call detail record mapping. Where was everyone's phones during all of this? More importantly, where was Devyn's phone during this? And we had Detective Good testify that the defendant's phone was at the murder scene when the murder was occurring. And what's also interesting to note, which you kind of have to get close to see, that there's sort of this blue dot that is now traveling with Devyn's red device all the way back. And this was at that 2:04 in the morning. So that's how we know that the victim's phone was taken by Devyn back to her home, because we have that Google geofence highlighted by that blue dot there of Jonathan's phone, showing when it actually got to Porcupine Rim, and that's when Devyn got there. We also heard phone content evidence, which demonstrates Devyn's intent in this case. I worry as much as you probably won't believe. I miss us. I'm glad you appreciate what we once had. We will have it all again, Jonathan says. I want our family back. We gotta do as great as we can for the girls to have a good life. The walls were closing in. We have the video surveillance that was played for you in depth during trial. And there's some important notes from that. We saw how much video surveillance was canvassed in that Paladura neighborhood. There was a point where the detective even said he couldn't pinpoint the address that I needed him to because of all these contacts here. Then we have that next door residence to the murder house, that 2696 Paladura Drive. Again, next door. And this is that video I talked about earlier where we do see the Nissan activated and we see it move in front of the driveway of the murder home, 2698 Paladura. We also see in this vantage point of the video when Devyn and the victim returned home from that trip from Chevron. When they were coming from Porcupine Rim, stopped at the Chevron, got some items, then came back, and we actually saw those shadows of two figures, which would be Devyn and Jonathan, getting out of his truck to go inside of the Paladura residence. This camera gives us that as well. And again, 11:05 p.m., we get that activation, and we see that the Nissan Armada is moved up closer to the residence. Why would she want to move it closer to the residence? She's concealing her crime. Then at 2:04 a.m., we also get from this residence that the Nissan Armada leaves, putting sort of a bookend on the timing of the murder. We then have the video surveillance from the Chevron. We've also called it the Terrible Herbs. And in there, I talked a little bit about this. We have that they're there at 10:10. That's Jonathan's truck pulled by a trailer. They then leave at 10:11 p.m. And we know that Yoko, as well as the video surveillance from the Paladura neighborhood, they're arriving into that neighborhood around 10:12 p.m., all corroborating, giving us our time frame. We have the video from the CVS pharmacy, the drive-thru, 2:28 a.m. on August 7th of 2023. This is after the murder, where she's at CVS. Again, giving us a time frame. There's no one in that vehicle but Devyn. You can see with your eyes. We then have the 6621 Gray Juniper surveillance video camera from Devyn's neighborhood. This is that one that was fixed where you could see the only entrance and exit of the Porcupine Rim neighborhood, and it was constantly running. We were able to see different things from that. Remember, it was 3 minutes slow to real time, but accurate. At 8:57 p.m., we have John's truck entering the neighborhood. And this is on August 6th. Then at 9:29 p.m., John's truck leaving the neighborhood, further corroborating the timeline. Then importantly, at 2:39 a.m. on August 7th, after the murder, we see Devyn's Armada and Devyn returning back to her residence. At no point was Devyn or Deviere's work truck or that sedan seen entering or exiting. Very important. We don't see his work truck or any of his vehicles leaving until 7:31 a.m. on August 7th. So now let's talk about Devyn's motive and intent, which is very important to consider. We heard from individuals that knew about the child custody case during this trial. And they told you that Jonathan had been given full primary physical custody of the two girls, Tamaya and Jamea. And this happened on October 27th of 2022. So at the time of the murder, Jonathan technically still had full physical custody of the girls. He had something he could hold over Devyn's head. The walls were closing in on her. We also heard from Elizabeth Lemons Woods, who also had worked on the child custody case and sort of the placement of the girls after Devyn was arrested. She meets with Devyn on August 17th of 2023. She wants to tell the defendant, hey, heads up, I just want to notify you, the girls are being placed somewhere else because you're not there, and their father is no longer around. And what Elizabeth Lemons Woods testified to is that defendant then started giving her more information, more than the scope of what the original conversation was supposed to be about. And what I think is notable is that Elizabeth says that throughout the conversation, Devyn appeared that she was trying to cry. Why would you try to cry? Devyn said during this same conversation, she had to do it. She had to do it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's very important, and you're in fact instructed on this, to use your everyday common sense and judgment as reasonable men and women. Do not check your life experience and what you know to be true at the door. Bring that with you when you deliberate. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. It's hard, and Mr. Giordani hit the nail on the head when he said, buckle up, this is a wild ride. This is unfathomable. But this is what happened. We are confident as the state that having all of this evidence in front of you, that you are going to go back to that jury room and you are going to check guilty of first-degree murder with the use of a deadly weapon, because the defendant committed first-degree murder under both theories: premeditation, deliberation, and also felony murder. Thank you.